What to do next with our pear cider.
All right, so we started this on April 8th. Today is April 13th. That is 5 days. And after 5 days, that airlock is showing neutral pressure. It actually started showing neutral pressure like 2 days ago. So this is amazing. However, it's a fairly low ABV. It started at a 1.050, so it can get to like 7% or so. But that's still kind of fast. So we want to check this and see where it's at. We are not racking this yet, no matter what the reading is, but we're going to take a little taste and see how it's doing.
But before we take a hydrometer reading, let's take a closer look at the actual beverage itself. So at the top here, we have our croissant line with quite a significant amount of proteins and other goodness collected to the edge there, and that's completely normal. And then just below that, you see the edge of the liquid itself, and there's little tiny bubbles, but not a really thick line. So I think any of the bubbles that are coming up now are probably degassing, but we're going to take a hydrometer reading to verify that. And then we go down.
You can see how it's striating.
Yeah.
It's definitely darker at the bottom.
Yep.
It's hard to see in video, but there's definitely a darker line.
And we have a really thick, like that thick,
sediment layer.
Yeah.
Fleece.
Fleece.
I'm not surprised at all because we used
a full packet.
Well, we used whole pears.
Yeah. So there's a ton of stuff in here that needed to settle out, and it looks like it's actually doing so. So
yeah, that's pretty cool though. This is only 5 days old. And that's one of the things that we like about making ciders and things like that, is that they happen kind of quickly. So you can make something like this and have like a longer brewing mead going at the same time. And that way you can be drinking this, as you're bottling the next one or something. And summer's coming. This is more of a lighter, summery type drink. So we thought, why not? And I moved that because microphone right there. I didn't really want to hit it. And I do that all the time.
Yeah.
It does have a really neat color. Oh, I think we're floating. Excellent.
Can you check that? It was tilted, so
it is.
Okay.
Just floating. Okay, so I'm just going to stick the airlock on here so that we don't have to hold it. But our reading is actually 1.010, which is a little bit surprising. I would have thought this would have gone all the way to dry by now. So I'm not sure that it's completely done. It might just need a little more time. However, as we are wont to do, we're going to take just a tiny little taste, literally like a mouthful each. Not expecting great things. It's 5 days old. It's very young. And I'm going to pour this back in. Some people don't do this, but I'm not some people, because I know everything was sanitized in
the red bucket of sanitization.
Her hands were full. She couldn't do the jazz hands.
I didn't jazz hands. I'm so sorry.
But the reason is, if this hasn't been sanitized, then you don't want to pour it back in, okay? Because you could be putting microbes and things back into your brew, which could be bad.
So Brian is going to now take a note on that reading we just took before he forgets.
So today is 4/13/21. Is 1.010. I'm actually a little bit surprised that it only went to 1010. I would have thought this would have gone totally down. Okay, on the smell, it smells pretty much like every very young cider I've ever tried.
But it's very fruity, so it doesn't, to me, it didn't smell as bad as an apple cider at this stage would smell, if that makes sense.
It certainly tastes better than an apple cider at this stage.
Yes.
Far better.
Yes.
This is actually quite drinkable right now.
Yeah.
I'm
Now,
a little surprised at that.
We're not saying bad things about apple-based beverages. We just know in our experience that it tends to take them an exceptional long time to get to that stage where they're like, oh, this is really good.
By exceptional long time. A few months. Okay.
Sure.
Some people say that they make ciders that are great in like 3 weeks. We have not had that experience. Now, a lot of time we are using juices for our ciders. If we were using whole crabapple, like what people use to make scrumpy and things like that, then we might actually have much better luck. But with the sources that we have available to us, it takes a little bit longer. I do want to calculate the ABV of this real quick, though. So to do that, we start with our original gravity, which is 1.050. subtract today's gravity, which is 1.010, and we get 0.04 times my coefficient of choice, which is 135. Some people do use 131.25. In this case, I probably could use either one. They're both so close, but accuracy is kind of perspective when it comes to homebrewing. You're never exactly right. So let me just do that. And we get 5.4%. That's pretty respectable for a cider right off the bat. Now, it still has room to go about another percent or so. This should be about 6.5 to 6.75. So I don't think it's actually done. But we took our first reading, so we're going to put this away, wait 1 week, see you again in a week with another reading. All right, so we're on day 19 of this fermentation, and we've already done one test, so now we're going to do the second test, which is basically just to make sure that it's done fermenting. So I'm just going to remove the airlock, just like before, and just grab a sample, take a reading. I think I need a more master baster.
Oh, whoa,
Yep,
whoa.
yep. Nothing I can do about it. But thus the more master baster. Okay, so it's still at 1.010, exactly where it was before. So this is finished. Why did it finish at 1.010? That's a really good question. It seems to have ever so slightly stalled, which I make messes. That's what I do. Which is rather unusual, unexpected, but it's also entirely possible that there was more sugars in some of that pulp that was in there than we previously thought. I don't know. There's a million ways that I can try to rationalize this. I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to go with the idea that we started at 1.050, it ended at 1.010, and we're going to go from there. So, if we want to calculate our ABV, because that's pretty much where we're at.
So, as you may see from your vantage point, but we can definitely see from our vantage point, there is a huge amount of sediment in the bottom of this.
There's 3 layers here.
There we got the stratification here.
It cleared nicely at the top. It's not totally clear yet, and it may never totally clear because there's pectins in pears. But it did clear pretty well here, and then we have a very loose layer here. When I moved it was very loose. And then we have a more tightly packed layer at the bottom. So that's why we're going to rack this. This may require more than one racking to get it clear enough to actually bottle it. But let's get to racking it now.
So we've opted to use our favorite pitcher.
The fancy schmancy pitcher of volumization.
Because once we rack that into this, we will have a better idea of what secondary fermentation vessel we can use.
Right.
Because we'll know how much we actually have.
Yeah, because there's probably going to be a significant amount of loss here. And I may go a little bit into that cloudy area just to minimize the loss. And I'm guessing it's going to be the 3-liter bottles, but we'll see. Racking, really, really simple. It's getting it from this vessel into this vessel. We like to use an auto siphon. You can just use the racking cane and tube. There's little things about that, like you have to start it somehow, and I don't know, try to keep it germ-free because everything that we use here has been sanitized in
the red bucket of sanitization.
The one-handed jazz hand today. Some people will put their mouth on the end of the tubing, which is the old-fashioned way of starting a siphon. I mean, as we learned from doing that with cars, it's probably not the best idea. So keeping germs off of your tubing is probably the best method. And I like the auto siphon. They're super cheap. If you can't get one, just use tubing. Pouring from one vessel to another, absolute last resort. In other words, if you absolutely have no other way of doing this, then pouring it is sort of almost acceptable. I still hate to suggest it because you can ruin your brew. You can infect it, you can oxygenate it, you can do all sorts of things to it. This is not a high alcohol product. So vinegar, the act of making it into vinegar is a very real prospect. So we want to make sure to minimize the amount of oxygen going into it. And siphoning does that.
Basically, whatever method you use, you want to be as careful as possible.
Yes, that. So as I said, we're going to have more loss in this than usual. I went pretty far into that first layer because I saw that it's really just wispy lease. It just hadn't fully settled yet. So some of that did get into our brew here, but that's okay. This can sit for weeks, couple months if it needs to totally settle out and clear. But that is a significant amount of loss. And as a result, we have just under 3 liters left, or about let's see, that is just under 98 ounces. So we are going to use one of our 3-liter Carlo Rossi bottles because that's the perfect size for this. Okay, so now we have it racked to our pitcher. We use the pitcher to determine how much we need, and I happen to have a 3-liter bottle. It's the old Carlo Rossi bottles. Somebody told me you can't really get them anymore, but I think there's another cheap wine that you can get. Basically, it's like $10 for the bottle, and the wine comes for free. So the only caveat is you have to be of age to purchase it. So anyway, same idea. We're just going to rack it right back into that. Now, someone might ask, do I have to rack it twice like this? No, you actually don't. If you can calculate what size vessel you need right away, go for it. We just didn't want to have too much headspace in there, so that's why the 3-liter was perfect. I could have put it back into the same type of container, but there'd be a lot more headspace, and that could cause a vinegar issue. I say could. You can do this 1,000 times and never have it happen, and then suddenly it'll happen 5 times in a row. So just be careful. All right, so we got our 3-liter bottle here, and it filled it up into the area that's the good spot, so there's less headroom. And we're just going to put our airlock back on. By the way, these little plastic caps, if you can find bottles that they fit on, are wonderful. They save the popping up aspect of your airlocks and bungs. And we just put it back on like that. And what are we going to do now?
I'm going to let it sit.
This is going to sit for quite a while, I bet. A few weeks, probably. Let that clear out, get more of that lease out of there, and we'll see if we rack it again. But see you in a couple minutes. So we racked this about 2 weeks ago. It's time to bottle it. I mean, there's a good amount of sediment on the bottom here. We could rack it again, but my concern now is I don't really have a container a little bit smaller than this 3-liter. So if I was to try to put it into this again, I risk a headspace issue. Plus, there is also the consideration of we want to carbonate this, and the length of time that it takes between when fermentation starts to when you carbonate actually matters, and there's no set in stone. So everybody's going to ask me and go nuts on this one, but if you wait like 6 or 8 months in primary and then try to carbonate, it's less likely to work, okay, because the yeast are tired, for lack of a better word, but that's not really the term.
The reason being carbonation, natural carbonation that is actually a mini controlled fermentation.
Yes, absolutely. So you want yeast that are still somewhat living. Even though this went dry, the yeast in here are still actually, they're in good shape. They can still do something. Because remember, this was only a 1.050 starting gravity. So what we're going to do is just rack it out of this jar into here and then get some bottles ready.
So before we jump ahead of ourselves, we need to take a taste and see if there's any adjustments that need to be made at this point.
On the smell, though, it's young. It's a little footy.
It is a little footy, but I am still getting pear, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Right. Now this stopped at 1.010, so there's a little bit of residual sweetness in there, and I don't have an explanation for that. I would think it must be some sort of an unfermentable sugar that's in there, because there's no way this yeast didn't just go dry.
I am actually okay with where it is.
Yeah, me too.
Because I know we intend to carbonate it, and I know that carbonation plays a trick and makes you think that something is sweeter than it actually is. So with that little bit of sweetness in there, that nice pear note, plus the carbonation, like I think it's going to be fine just the way it is.
Yeah. Now, most of the time when we carbonate, we use sugar. You can use all sorts of fermentables. Anything that ferments can be used for carbonation. But today I'm going to use honey. Why? Well, because I felt like it. It was something different. Yeah. We've never actually carbonated with honey on the show, so I thought, why not? So what I did is I actually calculated out how much honey I would need based off of the amount of brew that I have, which I have about 3/4 of a gallon here. So 3/4 of the normal 1 ounce of sugar would be a number which I can't think of off the top of my head, but it actually comes out to about 30 grams of honey is like the perfect amount. So I'm just going to add 30 grams of honey to this and mix it through really good. Now, the mixing does 2 things. It's going to mix the honey in, and it's actually going to degas. So that's going to get rid of any sulfurous gases from fermentation that might be in here. That might be adding to that little bit of a slightly young taste. But when I do mix this, I don't want to be too rough with it. I want to let gases out, but I don't want to let too much oxygen in. So it's not a typical degassing.
So he's not like doing a vigorous, it's more a swirling.
Now, a lot of people will add a specified amount of sugar or carbonation drops to each bottle. I don't actually like that method, and here's why. It's very hard to work in very small increments very accurately. It's much easier to have the large amount, add my small measured amount to that, then I know it's equal across all the bottles. And that to me just comes across a lot safer. Anybody that I've ever heard of that made a bottle bomb did it the other way.
The key to the method that Brian is using here is to make sure that you are completely mixed.
Yeah, because if you're not, then you're not consistent, and one bottle will have a lot more sugars than the other. So I'm over mixing, which is to say I'm just mixing a little bit longer. A little bit more on natural or bottle conditioning carbonation. What it literally is a tiny fermentation, as Derek has said, and that's why we put in a very small measured amount of sugar. If this was like much sweeter and we tried to do it, or if we were past the alcohol tolerance, it won't work, okay? If it was much sweeter and it was below the alcohol tolerance, that means it could possibly over-carbonate and explode, which is really, really bad and very, very dangerous, actually. So you can do it within certain ranges. That's why if we were going to make this sweeter, it probably would have been allulose or erythritol added. That way, we wouldn't be adding any fermentable sugars to be able to add to that extra pressure. It would just add that little bit of sweetness.
Now, that said, if you wanted to use a fermentable sugar as your additional sweetness, you would want to stop fermentation at some point by pasteurization. And we have a video on that procedure specifically.
It does complicate things a lot. That's why we don't do it very often, but we do have some videos on that. Now, our bottles, people have been asking, we just use swing top bottles. Really, really simple stuff. The seals can be replaced, and we use these same bottles for years and years and years.
So these are actually repurposed Fleischerberger bottles, and these are the 12-ounce size. But I didn't find enough, and I wanted one clear one so you could see the beverage itself. So this is a Amazon purchased swing top bottle that I'll have in the description below, and this is a 16-ounce.
The trick to bottling, if there is a trick to bottling, is to use a bottling wand. And it just stuck right into the hose of our auto siphon. It has a stem valve on the end so that you can push down and release the liquid, and when you lift up, it stops. So that way you can fill the bottles. Generally speaking, you want the bottle filled to about there. And what I do is when the liquid seems like it's just about up to here, I pull the wand out because it does displace some of that liquid.
Now we've removed our cap from the end of our auto siphon because we've just racked this so we know we don't have to worry about sediment in the bottom of our pitcher.
What she's talking about is there is a little cap that prevents it from going into the sediment, and since there's no sediment, we don't have to worry about not going into it. It's easiest with two people. If you only have one person, let me see if I can actually show you how I do it. So I'm going to hold this. Derek is just balancing. Oh, she's not touching anything. I'm holding the bottle and balancing it. See, I have that pushed down. And then I take finger here and I go like this and get it started. And then you don't even have to touch that anymore. See, it can be done. And now it's the same thing, though it is easier with two people. All right, so we filled our bottles and there's like 6 ounces left in here. To me, that's not enough to try to carbonate because I don't have any 6-ounce size bottles. So I'm just gonna, we're gonna drink it. Well, Derek is going to drink it. And the rest of these, I'm going to take my fancy schmancy masking tape and make labels for them. And it's just basically going to say the date it was started, the date it was bottled, what the ABV is, which generally speaking, you want to add about 0.4% ABV for carbonation. So this is 5.4%. Adding 0.4, it'll be about 5.8%. Fairly respectable for a cider. And these will be carbonated for, let's say, a week to up to 3 weeks, okay? It can take some time. Now, there is no rush to get them refrigerated either because we measured the amount going in. So they can't overcarbonate. They can only carbonate as far as they can go. The yeast will actually stop once there's no more sugars to ingest. So these can sit for months if we wanted to.
We actually have some of our Dunkelweizen and our rosemary hydromel that we carbonated that are still in the carbonation
they're still in the
tub.
bomb shelter. And they're fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening to them. That's just the way this works. Natural fermentation is wonderful because if you do it properly, it's incredibly safe. It tastes great. You don't have all the preservatives and things like that. And products are pretty repeatable and consistent. And you understand what's happening within those bottles and within that fermenter. Really, really great way to do the hobby. But anyway, so if you like this video, look up. There's another one up there. You might like that video too.